president of the Nebraska Telecommunications Association, and it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Bob Gnapp. Get ready for a lively and fast-paced, interesting look at the growing Internet of Things, that environment and what it means to your rural network. This morning, we're going to discover some amazing applications and powerful technologies that are all made possible by you, the rural network. Our tour guide this morning is Bob Gnapp. He's the Director of Member Training and Network Analysis at NECA. Bob began his career at NECA in 1989 and held a number of management positions in varied areas of responsibility, including rate development, settlements, cost study, USF analysis, CABS accounting, tariffs, and training. Sounds like a boring guy. He currently heads a department that provides tariff interpretations and member company training on a wide variety of topics, including technology. I need to tell you that Bob is very unaccustomed to public speaking. He's very shy, maybe even demure. So please, let's give him encouragement with a warm Matt's welcome. Bob Gnapp.
Good morning. My name is Bob Gnapp, and today we're going to talk about the Internet of Things and I can't even say demure. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Way better. Excited to be here, and you should too, because even if I suck, you guys get breakfast. I'll try my best not to suck today. This is a nice change of pace for me teaching this topic, in that I'm not talking about NECA tariffs, I'm not talking about pooling, I'm not talking about access charges, I'm not talking about USF, or I'm not talking about the FCC, and wonderful things that they've done to you over the past 6 years or so. Talking about the Internet of Things. And of course, you are a part, as telephone companies, of that Internet of Things. In that, you are providing the glue that sticks all the components of the Internet of Things together, and that being providing high-speed internet connections or private IP networks or dedicated networks that enable everything to work. Without that component, it doesn't work. Now, many of you are probably offering gigabit or near gigabit services, and that's great. However, there aren't that many customers who truly need a gig yet. In that, unless you have an old lady who lives in a shoe with so many children she didn't know what to do, and each of those childs has 6 devices and they're all streaming 4K HD video in 3D, probably not peaking that. However, there are many who believe that someday new and exciting and bandwidth intensive, in some cases, applications and uses for that broadband will come. And that really is the topic that I'm going to talk about. What prognosticators and experts and futurists believe will be the Internet of Things over the next 5 to 30 years. Now, am I myself a prognosticator? A futurist? I try. Not great. Share a story with you. For those who used to remember, I used to be a full-time trainer. And this was about 17 years ago, not long after NECA introduced DSL, which was a big deal because your customers were going to internet access speeds measured in baud, bits per minute, up to maybe 56 kilobits per second, and all of a sudden we're introducing DSL. And I'm in my training and I'm talking about NECA's DSL, which was up to 1 megabit per second down, 256 up. And one of my students asked me, so when is NECA going to add higher speeds? I was like, do you know how fast a megabit is? What would you ever use more than a megabit for? Well, apparently they found some uses, so my prognostication in that case did not pan out. So that's what I'm going to talk about, what they're going to use your networks for. Of course, where does one turn to find out what the future of the Internet of Things is going to be? Why the Internet, of course. And I referenced more than 100 different documents for the development of this training class or this presentation. A lot of it comes from Pew Research, who's done probably 5 or 6 different studies or canvassing efforts asking industry experts and prognosticators what they believe will be in the future. Some of them may be far-fetched or seem far-fetched. Some of them may seem like science fiction, but keep in mind, many science fiction movies being made today are based on some of the things that are going on now. So some of these ideas are based on existing technology. Some of these ideas are based on technology that's yet to be imagined. But of course, as we take our trip through the Internet of Things and head backwards before we head forwards, you'll see that something that we have today 20 years ago was unthinkable. Some of these are based on human-to-machine communications, but more and more we're seeing machine-to-machine communications. So all of this will happen behind the scenes, and you hopefully will be the beneficiary of that information, although as we'll see in our presentation, not everything with the Internet of Things is going to be positive. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. We're going to start out with, well, what is the Internet of Things? And that is a diagram of the Internet of Things, at least one of the several diagrams I came across in my picture search. And the Internet of Things has various definitions. I've heard a couple of them already at this meeting. My definitions, I love when I get really loud all of a sudden. By the way, can everyone hear me? Okay? The Internet of Things actually, in my research, consists of 5 components. The first one is devices. If you prefer, gizmos and gadgets. Now these devices have various functionality. Many of them have sensors, many of them have actuators, some of them have the ability to store information, some of them have the ability to actually process information, but importantly they have the ability to transmit information to other sources, and that information can be shared to increase the utility of those particular services. And there's a lot of them out there. The latest estimate that I came across was right around 9 billion devices today, excluding laptops, excluding cell phones, and excluding computers. Now, if we go back 10 years ago, there were those who believed that we'd be a little further on. IBM projected by 2020, we would have 1 trillion devices on the Internet of Things. Ericsson was a little more conservative. They predicted 50 billion devices. And they've all backed off of those. They've backed off of those for a variety of reasons I'll touch on in just a second. But now the current estimate is by 2020, somewhere between 25 and 30 billion devices, not including tablets and computers and cell phones. Now, why have they backed off? Well, in some cases, people are just aggressive. If you'll remember, Stanley Kubrick in 1969 made 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he predicted by 2001 that we would have these miraculous abilities to fly Pan Am to the moon or to space stations and then fly on to other planets and have artificial intelligence that was easily able to communicate and then potentially sabotage their mission. And we're going to talk about artificial intelligence because that is a component of that. But there's also economics. Boy, I have this great gadget and it's going to do things that you really like. How much is it? It's $1,000. I'm not going to adopt it. And we're seeing some of that with the connected home. Slowly and surely people are finding value in that. And more than that, as more is produced, the cost of producing those will go down, and then we'll see an acceleration as that happens. But there's also politics. And we'll see that later on in the presentation. And there's also policymakers. Great new devices that will enhance healthcare. If it has to go through the FDA, it's not going to come out in 30 seconds. So those type of things we're going to run up against as we try to forge ahead with the Internet of Things. And as we'll see, it'll be problematic as well. And I just realized I skipped over, I didn't skip over that. I just wanted to mention that we will go backwards. I'm already covering some of my later topics, so we'll just skip through the agenda here. I'm going to talk about healthcare, education, transportation. I'm going to talk about the Internet of Things in the workplace, and I'm also going to talk about cybersecurity. Sorry for getting ahead of myself. Here's the slide where I was explaining the Internet of Things. They just look so similar, but way better diagram, right? Okay, maybe not. So we have devices. What else do we have? Well, we have processing and storage. As we see this steady increase and then potentially exponential increase in the Internet of Things after we break through those different barriers, we're going to see a lot more information. And the ability to process and store that information is really one of the key benefits of the Internet. Another component, of course, is big data, just as I've spoken of. Big data is the collection of that information. And by combining big data with other big data, you get bigger data and you start to see things happen, and we'll discuss that big data application in both the workplace and in the healthcare environment. But almost every area will benefit from big data. Of course, the fourth component is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is essentially an attempt to mimic human intelligence. The ability to reason, the ability to set goals and accomplish those goals, and most importantly, the ability to learn as the life of that artificial intelligence device increases. And we're pretty much in the infancy of this. I'm sure many of you have heard of Watson, and many of the other names have gone around. You've seen artificial intelligence beat the pants off of people on Jeopardy. But when it comes to human reasoning and those other components I mentioned, we still have a way to go. And of course, the fifth is the Internet. Not necessarily the Internet, but in some cases a private IP network. But that's the glue that holds it all together, and that's where you come in. So that's the Internet of Things. Before I go forward into this next slide, I just realized something very, very important that I neglected to do, and that was share a story with you. How many of you golfed earlier this week? Was it awesome? Okay, well, I remember the last time I golfed at an association meeting. And I remember very clearly, I was on the first tee, and I lined up and I swung and hit a 300-yard drive, 150 yards straight down the fairway, followed by the most wicked hook you've ever seen, off to the right another 150 yards, into a construction site where they were building homes. And most of you know, a golf course doesn't reach its maximum beauty until you surround every square inch of the golf course with a house. So I find my ball, and I look over, and there's a construction worker. He's doing the strangest thing I've ever seen. He's hammering nails into the siding of a house to hold it there. But the way he's doing it is very odd. He reaches into a satchel of nails he has in front of him. He looks carefully at the nail, and then he hammers it in. Reaches in, pulls out another one, looks carefully at it, throws it away. Reaches in, pulls out another nail, looks at it, hammers it in, and so forth. And he's throwing away about every other nail. So I walk up to him and I go, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be nosy, but why are you throwing away those nails? He goes, oh, those nails are defective. So I looked at him and I go, well, they look okay to me. What's wrong with them? Well, he goes, when I pull into my satchel and I pull out a nail, if the pointy end is facing the house, I hammer it in. But if the pointy end is facing away from the house, it's defective, so I'm throwing it away. I had the same reaction that you did. I said, those nails aren't defective. They're for the other side of the house. Other side. Okay, glad I got that one in before I went too far. So let's talk about devices, and we'll start with this. And while these aren't in Ericsson's official count of devices or Gartner's official count of devices, this is most certainly a component of the Internet of Things, whether you call it a device or processing or storage. And it's replaced many, many things. For example, it's a camera, it's a video recorder, it's a stereo system with unsurpassed amounts of music. It's a compass, it's a GPS, a portable gaming console, a dictionary, a clock, a stopwatch, a television, a remote control, a wallet, a flashlight, a calculator, a calendar, a portable gaming console, and of course, a powerful computer. Pretty impressive. But we don't really think of this as really impressive because we've had a nice gradual increase from the flip phone to texting to things. Oh, by the way, if you have any kids who were born after like 1995, let them know that you can also speak to people who are at a distance with your voice as opposed to texting them. So let's say that we hopped in a time machine, which incidentally, not one of the prognosticators thought we'd have in the next 30 years. But let's just imagine. And we go back 20 years to where the cell phones are bricks. Those of you who've been around long enough know what I'm talking about. And then you tell them all those things that this replaces. And then you go on to tell them that you can access dozens of free encyclopedias, you can access street maps of almost every street in the world, you can look at a satellite view down at almost any place on Earth, down to where you can see cars and people. Real-time box scores, quotes, weather reports, access to every newspaper and virtually every manual in the world, and then you go on and tell them about the applications. Tell them about Pandora and Facebook and YouTube and Snapchat and Uber and FaceTime, and of course the most important means of communicating in the political world, which is Twitter. They would think that you were crazy. Or they would run out and buy Apple and Samsung stock. So while we've seen this migration, this is an amazing development in the Internet of Things in a very short time frame. It's 10 years ago when we first started seeing basic smartphones. So now we go forward 20 years from today in our time machine. And what will we be looking at then? The answer to that depends on whether you're an optimist, a pessimist, or a neutralist. Let's change slides here. The optimist, in this example, Joel Halpern, believes that we're going to see an actual acceleration in the growth, and new and wonderful things are most certainly to come. And like Mr. Halpern, many say, I know it's coming, I just don't know what it is. There are others who say, I know exactly what it's going to be, and that's what the rest of our presentation is going to cover, what they believe we're going to have, even if we don't have the technology. In some cases, we do. Then there's the neutralist. The neutralist says, yeah, we've had a lot of good things, it's pretty cool, we'll get a couple more cool things, some people are going to get rich, but in reality, we're not really going to see exponential growth like we've seen over the past 20 years in the Internet of Things. And then there's the pessimist. Now, the pessimist doesn't believe that new things aren't coming, but they believe that the downside of those new Internet of Things will be far outweighed by the social bad that's going to result from these new devices. In essence, they're saying people who are bastards today will be bastards tomorrow. They're just going to have greater means to be bastards. That's right, someone bet me I wouldn't say bastard 3 times, not 4, in one presentation. We're going to spend the latter part of our presentation talking about just that. So let's move into healthcare. I spent a lot of time on healthcare. I'll try to move quickly because I'd like to get you out of here by noon, right? That's how long I have until noon?
Yeah.
No? Okay, noon. Healthcare is riddled with problems, and I'm not talking about Obamacare versus trying to revoke that and replace it. I'm really talking about the issues associated with healthcare internally. For example, we have an aging population. Our baby boomers are about to head, or already heading, into the most costly part of their lives. Then there's increasing costs. The cost of healthcare continues to rise. That combined with the fact that we have a growing doctor shortage. Anticipated to be 130,000 doctors in the United States short of what we'll need absent some sort of development. IoT will go a long way to relieving those particular problems. let's take a look at some of the tools that we already have today. And that's remote monitoring. Certainly a wonderful way of keeping people home longer when they're ill, keeping them from coming to the hospital when they don't have to, but more for discovering illnesses early. So we have devices that monitor blood pressure and communicate that to your doctor, as all these devices do. A pulse oximeter, which measures the oxygen in your blood. An EKG, devices that measure your blood sugar. Importantly, not only communicating that information to the user, but communicating it to their healthcare provider, saving them trips into the doctor. When I first discovered that I had high blood pressure, it was by using my own blood pressure cuff. I didn't go to the doctor and then they'd say, you have high blood pressure, you need to do something about it, which in my case was take pills. Now, the one thing I don't get is the scale. I guess my doctor wants to know what my weight is, but if I'm going to step on that scale, I'm going to have one hand on something. Okay, right around 182. I'm going to hold it, 182. Yep, that's what I weigh, which I don't, by the way. So this has made some improvement, but as we move forward into the future, those devices and monitoring for healthcare will improve and are improving. For example, instead of attaching a blood pressure cuff or some other device to my body and having it record for a few moments and sending that few moments of information, devices will eventually build either into our clothing or directly onto our skin. And what you're looking at here is called a biostamp. And the biostamp in this case is on the stomach of a very fat woman and pregnant woman, and it's monitoring fetal heart rate, continuously monitoring fetal heart rate, feeding that information to a nearby device, and sending that information. So the benefit here is not only that you're not tethered to something, but the benefit here is it's constant. It's constantly monitoring you, not for a moment, so you can see the effect of illness over a long time, or you can catch things that happen while you're active versus sitting down and so forth. So they see a lot of promise in this as well. And again, not just for sick people, but for healthy people as well. Eventually, we're going to see widespread deployment of these devices inside the body. And what you're looking at here is an implant. And on that implant is very low battery-powered sensors designed to do two things. One is to monitor the performance of this hip replacement implant. I'm sorry, not the hip, but whatever that ball socket is that goes into it. It's a medical thing. But not only that, but it measures the amount of inflammation around that prosthetic. So the doctors know not only how it's performing, but how it's healing. And we'll see further advancements. Now, I know this is a little bit scary here, and it's the only image I could find of a device that's going to be injected into your body. Realistically, I don't think that device floating in that syringe is actually going to make it through the needle, unless you push really, really hard. But you get the idea. We will have sensors in our body, and by the way, that already exists. Researchers at MIT are testing a device that you place under the skin. It's carbon nanotubes floating inside of a fluid. And it measures the amount of nitric oxide in your body. Nitric oxide is produced when you have inflammation. So it's there to tell the physician through this low-powered communication that there's inflammation going on. And again, it monitors in real time, sends a very low battery-powered signal to a nearby device and communicates that to the physician. But we're going to see even more advances. Now, from the distance medicine perspective, distance medicine has been around for some time, and most people think of distance medicine as I see my doctor and my doctor sees me. But they've actually developed things like this here. This is called a health spot. And this health spot's been around for a few years. I believe there are around 25 of these, all of them placed inside of Rite Aid stores with an assistant standing by to help. As we go inside of this health spot, it's got several different devices inside. It's got a stethoscope, it's got a blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter. In this case, it's got a dermoscope, which this gentleman is showing a picture of his retina to his doctor, which is a little surprising. You think she'd be paying more attention to the fact that his blood pressure is 157/99. But apparently he's got high blood pressure and he's got something wrong with his eye. And of course, this has bacteria-proof materials, and it has UVC lighting, which gets rid of the bacteria and viruses that may be left by a sick patient. But again, it's mostly for diagnosis, not really for treatment. Although there are those who are looking further into treatment. We'll talk about distance treatment in just a second. By the way, HealthSpot went out of business earlier this year, not because it wasn't a good concept, but mostly because the money was poorly managed. And the way they had set this up, they were actually making people make an appointment to go to Rite Aid and go in there. And if I'm going to make an appointment, I might as well go to my physician or to an urgent care center to have my needs met. So I think we're going to see this explode. And from a rural perspective, that may be helpful if you've got one of these in your Rite Aid store, but your doctor's 60 miles away, or some other drugstore, some other location. Then there's surgery. By the way, what you're looking at is the Da Vinci surgical equipment. It actually has 4 arms. One that has a high-definition 3D camera, and the other 3 hold surgical instruments. And it's always got an assistant standing next to the machinery to help out, to change instruments, and so forth. This has been around for a while. In fact, it's one of the only FDA-approved surgical instruments. It's being used primarily today for cancer treatments, for urology, for gynecology, and for some surgeries that require very fine detail. And the surgeon actually sits at this and controls it. They sit at that across the room, and they control it, and what's neat about it is it can take big hand movements and turn them into tiny hand movements. And if your doctor has some sort of physiological shake, it'll take that out. So in essence, it makes smaller scars, it produces less bleeding and less complications. And there are about 2,000 of these, 2,500 worldwide of these machines. Why aren't there more? Sounds great, right? Because they're expensive. More than you have in your pocket, most likely, unless you have $2 million sitting in your pocket. But the price of those will go down. So if the doctor is sitting across the room at this station here, why can't he be sitting across the country? In fact, this has already been tested, although from an insurance liability perspective, there's some concern. Now, you still have to have standby people just in case something goes wrong with the machine. But if I'm in a surgical suite with one of these types of machines in some place in rural America, and I want to have surgery by the finest cancer specialist in the United States or the world, there's no reason that they have to be sitting in the room. And I think that's going to be the future. So people in rural America will have a choice of who they have their surgery done by, and they may not have to get on a plane and fly 1,000 miles to have that done. So that's something to look forward to. The technology already exists. You just have to get over some regulatory and insurance hurdles in order to make that happen. And as far as these machines are concerned, the greater the demand, eventually the lower the cost is going to be. I also wanted to talk a little bit about nanomedicine. Nanomedicine is a new science, or a relatively new science, although it was actually conceived back in the 60s. It's just now starting to come to fruition. And it consists of really 2 different components, nanoparticles and nanorobots, both of which are in testing. The nanoparticles are already in use. And one of those is this example that you see up on the screen. This is an illustration of a blood clot. What they do is they take these nanoparticles, nano coming from nanometer, which is 1/1,000,000th of a meter, and they make very tiny particles. In this case, these particles are clot-busting drugs. And when they hit the blood clot, they shear open and release at that location an intense blood clotting removing chemical. So if someone's having a stroke, you would inject this, it would flow through the system, and when it hit that block, it would release its clot-busting drugs. But it's not only being used for that, it's actually being used for cancer treatment. Again, very minute particles filled with a very potent chemotherapy, injected near the site of the tumor, adheres to the tumor gently and starts to release its chemotherapy, and actually glows green under a scan to let you know where the cancer is being attacked. Now, one might think, as I did when I saw this, why don't you just inject the tumor with a needle? And in some cases that's done, but in many cases it's not done, because when you introduce a needle and inject chemotherapy violently into a tumor, it tends to spread the tumor. So very promising, already occurring. Same thing with vaccines. You inject a vaccine in these nanoparticles, and they take very long to dissolve and release the vaccine, creating a stronger immune response. So in my mind, this is what we're going to see initially. Then we're going to see nanorobots. Now, nanorobots are envisioned to be very, very small. In this case, not as small, much smaller than this, but measured in nanometers. This one, for example, may travel through your arteries, clearing out plaque, or conducting microsurgery to repair tears, or to introduce a stent into a vein. By the way, this does not really exist. This is just a cool picture that I found on Shutterstock that I thought I'd use to illustrate this concept. But eventually they're going to get much smaller, on the scale of anywhere from 100 nanometers down to less than a nanometer. And by the way, less than a nanometer, we're talking about the size of a few molecules. And they'll actually be engineered at the molecular level. And sometime in the future, it's envisioned that you won't get antibiotics when you get sick. In fact, you won't get sick. You'll have millions of these robots inside of your body attacking cells just like your immune system would. If the cell is sick, or it's a cancer cell, or it's some unwanted cell, these robots will cure it before you get sick. So we see the end of antibiotics. Could be the end of the cold. Let's see how long that's going to take. No, it's going to take a little bit longer than my presentation is going to take. That was just a tricky way of me looking at my watch and seeing how much time I have left. So, cool, right? Eventually we could see actual changing of DNA. By the way, a DNA strand is about 2.5 nanometers wide. So whatever this is that goes in there probably isn't going to look like a robot. It's going to look like an assembly of a few molecules that's going to somehow go in there and impact that. And of course, there's been science fiction movies. How many of you have seen the movie Gattaca, where they go in and they genetically manipulate information? This could happen, maybe a little further down the line. 3D printing. I'm sure all of you have heard of it, but it has a lot more uses than probably the things you've used. In fact, it's already being used in the medical arena. It's being used to make contact lenses and hearing aids, and it's also being used to make custom prosthetics. Instead of using a size-fits-all prosthetic, it's using a custom-made, measured for the particular patient. And it works by layering different bits of information. And we're going to see a lot more advancement in this, creation of medical tools that never existed before. Or if you're in surgery and you don't have the equipment that you need, you download the construction information for this, and you have the 3D printer print it in just a few minutes. So is this realistic? Is it realistic to think that someday a 3D printer will make a heart? I'll let you be the judge, but they're already working on it. Using something called bioink, which is made of cells, different types of cells harvested from the host and grown. They've actually made functioning kidney cells. Not a full kidney, but functioning kidney cells. So someday, you will not, if you're sick and you need a replacement organ, have to rely on a deceased or a living donor. You will simply have that organ replaced using your own cells, so your immune system will not attack it. They'll recognize it. So pretty cool, I think. Perhaps the biggest outcome of all of this will be big data. And I talked about this in my introduction, if you'll recall. As we get into billions and billions and hundreds of billions of devices, all of those devices providing information, and as people in the United States get, or in the world, get one sensor, then two sensors, then a dozen sensors, it's going to produce a massive amount of information. And that information will be stored, and if it can be properly assembled, it can be used in conjunction with other data, perhaps genome information, perhaps environmental information. Again, we're collecting information about everybody, including healthy people. Once you apply artificial intelligence to this big data, you may see diseases being cured in days or weeks rather than years or decades. At least that's what the prognosticators believe will happen. Again, in the time frame we're talking about, the next 5 to 30 years. Let's move on to education. Education already is filled with the Internet of Things. Students are using computers and tablets in the classroom. They're getting their homework assignments by email. They're seeing presentations from other presenters over the internet. Even affects the way that I do my job. The vast majority of the students I train are via webcast. But many think we're going to go well beyond that. One of the examples that we're already seeing that could change the dynamic of education is something called MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. Kind of similar to a TED Talk. How many of you have seen TED Talks? If you haven't, check them out. It's very interesting. But essentially, it's an instructor or a presenter sharing information. Now, some of them are on obscure topics. I've actually pulled some information from this presentation from TED Talks. But as we move into these massive open online courses, they're teaching college courses to anybody who has internet access. And many colleges are getting big on this. Really started in 2008, took off in 2012. And it's envisioned that someday, students may take a good portion of their education from home. Maybe their entire freshman year is MOOCs. And then they go to college to have hands-on experience with their instructors looking over their shoulders. Many theorize it will also lead to something called master educators. Those who are the very best educators at a particular topic. And when students go to school or attend these from home, they will see the very best instructors in a particular topic. Those who know how to teach, those who know the topic, the very best. So, social studies, you might have 10 of these master teachers walking you through the class. Mathematics, so forth. And teachers may eventually become nothing more than facilitators and tutors. So it could really be a disruptive technology. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned it early, but a lot of these new Internet of Things will be disruptive. Just like my cell phone. My cell phone is disruptive. How many fewer cameras do you think camera companies sell now that everyone's walking around with a pretty good one? You may have one at home. You may go out and buy a good one if you're really into photography. But by and large, it's disruptive. How many of you have gone out and bought a compass lately? Not if it's on your phone and you have it with you all the time. Same thing with education, same thing with healthcare. We may see doctors eventually be put out of business when diagnoses are made by artificial intelligence. It may be the doctor's role is only to cure the affliction once it's been diagnosed by artificial intelligence. And I'm regressing back to my last topic. And let me go back here for a second. No, I covered that. Virtual reality and holograms. I don't touch on this too much, but if I talked about the military applications, which I have in preceding versions of this training, where I just don't have time to do it today, virtual reality and holograms will change the way we do a lot of things. not just education. But in education, we'll probably start out with virtual reality glasses, which are a computer-generated image of reality, or even augmented reality, which is a computer-altered version of reality. In education, students could see live demonstrations of something being performed. If you're taking a class on automotive sciences, you could have a highly qualified automotive technician demonstrating something in 3D, first on glasses, and then in holograms that surround you. Today, there are students who meet with other students from different countries to try to learn their languages by having real-time exchange over a video screen. How much better would it be if you're in a room with a hologram from a student or students from other countries who speak a different language, and they see your image and the image of your fellow class people as if they're in the same room? So if you're trying to do immersion in different languages to learn languages more quickly, that will help. Or classrooms will become, field trips will become much more different. Want to go see the Coliseum? Your entire class can go to the Coliseum without leaving the classroom, because they'll walk amongst a holographic Coliseum, or go underwater, or go out to space, or go back and see the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So these things will really start to replace let's say, the rudimentary or the beginnings of IoT in the classroom. Let's move on to transportation. Kind of a sexy topic, and one that we're already in the midst of. We'll talk about autonomous and connected cars, both of which already exist, albeit in their infancy. Autonomous cars are those that are equipped with sensors, equipped with radar, equipped with interpretive computers that can know the difference between different street signs, and so forth. And they already exist, they're already being tested. Both Google and Intel have developed them, and Tesla has developed a version of them. Although as of today, as far as I can tell, unless someone just released something since I got here, there are no truly autonomous cars yet in the United States. In other words, there must be a driver sitting behind the wheel ready to take over at any moment. But we'll soon overcome that, which will be neat. It'll be nice to sit back in your car, and then you can text and drive. Eventually, I guess you'll be able to drink and drive, as long as you're not actually driving. We'll wait and see how the rules come out on autonomous driving and alcohol. But in this mock-up, which I believe was produced by Lexus, they design a car where the driver faces the passengers and talks while they drive. So that'll be pretty cool, except if you're a taxi driver or if you are a trucker. You may quickly find that this is a disruptive technology for you, and you'll have to find something else to do. But the real benefits of autonomous cars is when they're all connected. And cars are already connected. Many of you have Wi-Fi in your car. Many of you have sensors in your car that will detect an airbag deployment and alert someone that you've been in an accident. Of course, GPS, I guess, is a form of a sensor. But when all these cars have multiple sensors, and they communicate not only with you and the car, but they communicate with other cars and street lights, stoplights and stop signs. That's when we're really going to start seeing the benefits in multiple ways. For example, parking. Today in big cities, 30% of the traffic jams are caused by congestion of people just going up and down streets looking for a parking spot. However, in the near future, the parking spots will have sensors and will alert some sort of system, either probably using wireless or wired communications, that there's an empty spot. And that spot will be assigned to someone either based on proximity or next in line. And of course, the sensors will have a device in it, so if someone parks in it who wasn't assigned, it'll blow their car up. So you'll really learn the meaning of not parking in someone else's spot, or in a handicapped spot is even worse. Safety will improve drastically. some car makers believe 85% of head-on collisions will be gone by 2020 because cars have this new auto braking. And when I say by 2020, I mean those cars produced in 2020 will have that ability. How many of you have auto braking or lane detection in your cars? Quite a few of you. Well, that will get even more advanced. Volvo predicts that its cars produced in 2020 and its trucks produced in 2020, that no one in those cars will be killed or harmed in their car, with one caveat: unless they want to die or they're really, really stupid. So we'll see an advance in that, advance in safety, and then, of course, the biggest advance is in traffic. Not traffic caused by parking, but traffic caused by too many cars on the road. As all these cars are connected to master systems and not only are autonomous but are guided, cars will go much, much closer to each other and be able to go much, much faster. So you might be driving 120 miles an hour and your bumper might be 2 feet off the bumper of the car in front of you, but since all these cars are communicating via this master traffic system, you'll be able to go faster and put perhaps 30 or 40% more cars on the same road during the same time. I'm looking forward to that. Those of you who live in rural areas are like, what traffic? But eventually, if you come to places like Kansas City, you'll appreciate that. So that's what we're going to see from the perspective of cars. We'll also see it in other means of transportation, like the connected airplanes. And don't get me wrong, airplanes are already connected. In fact, they're already pretty much autonomous. Maybe some of you remember back in the 1960s, there used to be a flight crew of 5 people. Someone for 2 people to fly the plane, an engineer, someone to communicate, and then another backup. Of course, now we have 2, and 95% of the time that you are flying on a plane, it's controlled by autopilot. Takeoffs and landings, as soon as they take off and get to the appropriate height, they turn on autopilot and it flies the plane. In fact, the technology exists. You could actually land a plane on autopilot if you wanted to. So the autonomous part is not there, although we could see that planes don't have any captains in the future. What we're looking at is sensors that monitor the plane's functions. When you think about how many times you've flown, you'll probably come up with a statistic I did. About 10% of your flights are delayed or canceled because of mechanical issues. Now, if we take the number of sensors in a plane and increase it by 100-fold, and they tell us months before a part is about to wear out and it can be replaced due to regular maintenance, you won't have a problem. Or if there's a problem in flight that wasn't anticipated, it can be communicated to the ground, and they can have that part ready to fix the plane as soon as it lands and pulls up to the gate. Pratt & Whitney is producing an engine, or getting ready to produce an airplane engine, that has 5,000 sensors compared to the 250 sensors it had before. Eventually, those sensors will help adjust thrust, and it's envisioned it will save anywhere between 10 and 20% of the fuel that is used, simply by adding more sensors, not only to that, but to the avionics and to the rest of the plane. Of course, that'll give new meaning to shutting off your cell phone and putting it in airplane mode before you leave and before you land. By the way, let me go back to the slide for just 1 second. It's just not the airline industry. Every industry is looking at adding more sensors. It just so happens that it's probably more important and more impactful in the transportation industry. And it'll be mostly machines talking to other machines and alerting humans in case of an impending failure. So when you talk about the connected home, your refrigerator will not only tell you that you need to pick up milk, it's going to tell you that this part is going to burn out in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So either plan on buying a new refrigerator or try to have it replaced before it fails and all your food spoils. So this will play a big part in manufacturing, not just in transportation. Entertainment. Now, if you take away the virtual reality glasses on this kid, That's exactly the position he's in when he's watching TV. And of course, these virtual reality glasses already exist, and they're starting to get more sophisticated than the one you put the cell phone in. I'm sure you've all seen the commercials, maybe some of you have used it, where people are reaching out and grabbing things because they're completely fooled by virtual reality glasses. Eventually, they're going to get much, much better. In fact, several large electronic companies are producing them already or getting ready to release glasses. Some of them are problematic in that the glasses are only $300, but the computer processing necessary for it is so large that most people have to go out and buy a new computer in order to run it. They're getting away with that now. Some of them are relying on broadband communications to a computer system in the cloud to run those, and some of them are getting sophisticated enough that they don't even need computers anymore. That'll be the beginning. Eventually, we're going to move to holograms. Holograms already exist. Maybe some of you have seen YouTube videos where someone's on stage and then two people from another city walk in. Very rudimentary, in fact. It's 3 different projections onto like a silk screen that the audience can't see. But nonetheless, it still exists. And as they get better and switch from projectors to perhaps diodes that emit 3D images onto the air, we're really going to see this encompass our experience. So someday we'll be watching movies, and 360 degrees around us will be holograms acting the movie out. And if you're watching the main character and you want to see what the other characters are doing, you're just going to turn and look. And of course, it'll be a unique experience in that, let's say you're watching a movie and you see a lamp that you really like. You can look at it, blink, or do something, and order it, or virtually tap on it while you're sitting in there, see the price and order it. Or if they don't have it, let's say you touch a vase and they don't have it, they will download to you the instructions to print it on your 3D printer, or print it on a 3D printer at a nearby location, and then have a drone deliver it to you a few minutes later. So neat experiences, 3D movies, 3D sports. Be very interesting to have a football game happening around you while you're sitting there. Give new meaning to armchair quarterbacks, I suspect. Then we look at the workplace. And this is particularly important from the perspective of those of you who have children who have left your rural communities to go get jobs elsewhere. Eventually, work will be filled with these holograms, and you will have virtual presence of people who are not there. For example, I might have a meeting sitting in Denver with someone who's sitting in Norway or Italy, and I don't have to worry, of course, about the language difference because our languages will be translated to each other instantly. And we'll be having that meeting on the beach in Hawaii without ever leaving our homes. In fact, 10 or 15 years from now, we're all not going to be sitting in a big room listening to a presenter discuss the future. You'll be sitting at home or in a virtual theater near your community, and all of us will be in this holographic theater in 3D. The best part is, you don't want to get out of your pajamas? Send an avatar image of yourself dressed to the nines. Or come as your favorite movie star. And you will see me as you're seeing me now at a distance. You'll see the people who are sitting next to you, but all of them will be sitting at home or at some area that's local to them. The airline industry is not going to be pleased. Probably not the hotel industry either, as travel for these type of meetings change. But the good news is I don't have to move in order to take a new job. In fact, I might vend out my time. I may work 2 hours a day for this company, and 2 hours a day for this company, and 2 hours a day for this company, all from the comfort of my home. As eventually we could see the end of the office. Eventually, the end of the office. The bad news is that you will no longer be competing for a job just with people who are local to you. You'll be competing for a job with anybody in the planet who has access to robust broadband. So there's going to be pros and cons, as there is with most of the things we're talking about. And with that, I'll move to artificial intelligence. The most exciting and the scariest part of the future of IoT. I talked about it earlier. Machines that are capable of emulating human intelligence much, much, much faster. And the scarier part of this is in the workplace. What of, instead of having an attorney and an accountant in my company, I have an artificial intelligence that one moment is an attorney and another moment is an accountant or a financial expert. And will your financial expert who's got 20 years of experience in finance and advanced degrees be able to compete with artificial intelligence that in a second or two can analyze thousands of financial documents and look at all the statistics related to your company and come up with a recommendation for an approach to financing? Will you be going to a financial advisor, or will you be going to an artificial intelligence device to invest your money? So this could bring along with it great advancements in productivity. It could also displace a lot of people from their jobs. And as with everything else, there are optimists and pessimists. The optimist is shown by this example here, is every time technology has been introduced in the past, it's displaced some jobs, mostly blue-collar menial work, and created as many or more new jobs for the workforce. So it's been a good thing as we've advanced in technology. However, that was machines and robots and computers replacing blue-collar jobs and giving those blue-collar jobs, workers, the opportunity to learn new skills and move to some other field. What happens when artificial intelligence takes over the majority of white-collar jobs? I'm hoping by then I'm going to be retired. But there are those who believe that it will be a negative effect. Because the positive side, history, also on the positive side, I'm going to go backwards here for a second, are those who say, yeah, we may come up with machines that are able to replace the majority of our workforce, but politicians and policy will come in the way from that happening. And they use as their rationale, if everyone is underemployed or unemployed, who's going to buy all these neat things that we're producing much more efficiently? So there's a flip side to all of these things. In fact, I'm into the flip side now on some of these things to sort of balance things. And then we'll talk about privacy. It's pretty easy to see that our privacy is already being compromised. When I was developing this training package, I went onto Google and I searched future of IoT in healthcare and came up with a lot of different articles. A few minutes later, I went onto Facebook to check my Facebook. Of course, it was lunchtime, so I wasn't doing this any time on work, just for the people at my company. And there, as one of the advertisements, was a white paper that I could purchase on the future of IoT in healthcare. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences. You shop on Amazon, and an ad shows up for it on Facebook. Data mining. This information is being shared. Do you remember signing permission for it? Well, probably it was in the 47-page terms of use that you just click yes and go onto the website on, or yes and subscribe to a particular service. And that will get more invasive as more and more devices are introduced into our daily lives. Some for the positive, some for the negative. Could be in the future as we get more and more into facial recognition that I might, well, let's use a fictitious person who isn't married. Someone may walk into a bar looking to pick somebody up, to meet somebody. And they'll either have the next generation of Google Glass or a contact lens, and they'll look across the room at somebody they find attractive, and they'll get instant facial recognition, and the service will scour the web for every fragment that they've ever done on the internet. And then walk up and go, hey Tracy, my name is Bill. I see you like Game of Thrones. I love Game of Thrones. You like West Highland Terriers, don't you? Me too. You've been to Costa Rica, haven't you? Yes, I've been to Costa Rica. Me too. Let's say, we obviously have a lot in common. Let's say the two of us head out of here and we go over to Ruth Chris, which I just happen to know is your favorite restaurant. That's what we're looking at from the perspective of, it's no longer meeting somebody and Googling their name and trying to find little scraps of information off of the net or going through their Facebook page and trying to glean information. It's a service that pulls every fragment of their use of the internet. So that privacy issue is coming. So what happens as a result of that? Well, some fear that we're actually going to back off our use of the internet. There will be those who go off-grid because they don't want everybody knowing everything about them. Others believe we'll do what we're doing right now. We just accept it. I accept the fact that Facebook showed an ad on the future of the IoT in healthcare because it was nicely targeted. It's really what I was looking for, and then you gave me an opportunity, and targeted marketing is good. From my perspective, annoying to other people. But when it gets even more, when people have access to your health data, it gets bad. And in the workplace. Today there are workplaces where sensors are used on all of the employees and within the building to monitor their movement. If they stop moving, the concern is that they've been injured, so they send someone to that location. Good, right? What happens when these sensors start tattling on you? I see you were using, I see that you took 20 minutes on your break and we only allow 15, or even worse. So these privacy issues will come to a head. Whether they'll be addressed through regulation is another thing, but they're already being used. Another challenge we're going to face, cyber security. Are we already facing cyber security issues? Yes. We've got plenty of hacks at the company level. As you can see, these flying in. These are larger scale. Some cases it's just your password, some cases it's your address. And of course with Equifax, who I now refer to as those bastards who let the world know what my social security number was, my birth date, my name, my address are, it's much more harmful. But that is just hacking into a system. What happens when someone hacks into your pacemaker? Or someone hacks into your car's system and forces it to crash? Or airplanes start dropping out of the sky because they hacked into all the sensors and tricked the pilot into doing something that crashes the plane. Those are going to be the challenges that we're going to face. And perhaps one of the biggest challenges we're going to face is artificial intelligence. I already talked about from the job perspective, and of course, you see here a usable image of what the Terminator is. I couldn't find a real Terminator that was on Shutterstock, the source of most of my photos. But people believe that this is real. This isn't just a TV movie. In fact, a group of artificial intelligence and robotic engineers, 116 of them, wrote letters to Congress trying to encourage them not to continue the development of autonomous weapons. Weapons that go out there and aren't indiscriminate like landmines, but pursue what is perceived to be the enemy. And by the way, these are already being developed, in some cases in conjunction with DARPA, which is the research arm of the military. So they're encouraging to avoid this from happening. This is no longer science fiction. The technology exists or soon will exist. Now, some of you may say, well, if it saves soldiers on the field, it's good, right? Well, perhaps it is. What happens if this technology gets in the hands of terrorists? Then you've got some problems. But there are some who believe it's not going to be artificial intelligence who sets out to destroy mankind. Artificial may destroy people by accident. Remember my earlier discussions of artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence sets goals and then tries to accomplish that goal. But what if that goal and humans' goals are not the same? Stephen Hawking believes that this is going to be the problem that we're going to face. It would be no different than somebody building a dam, or a corporation building a dam. And in the process, they kill 1 billion ants. Well, to artificial intelligence, unless it's programmed correctly, it could destroy mankind simply trying to accomplish its goals. So just something that raises my concern level. Okay, you guys all good and depressed now? I'm not going to end on that. Let's close with a discussion of some of the far-fetched. There were those in my research I came along, at least one individual, who thought eventually our use of touchscreens would lead to a genetic change where our hands would turn into tentacles, which I guess could be cool, but again, far-fetched. There are others, and this may be not that far-fetched, who believe that over time, when we never leave our houses because we're sending our avatars out in the world to work for us, that eventually we're going to become Wall-E-esque, huge people with very thin bones because we don't exercise. And that could be a real possibility. We all already see that with today's children who aren't going out and playing. Instead, they're sitting playing their games and on their computers texting. Now, they have huge thumb muscles, but everything else is not so much. And then one who believed that eventually, although I'm not sure in the next 30 years, all of our intelligence before we die will be transferred to a computer, and we will live forever as software and componentry and live on internally. And that was by a recognized expert at Google. Okay, I've done something unprecedented today, and that is I finished early. Please nod up and down and say I finished early. So, I'm going to open it up for questions. Who has the first question about anything that I've discussed today, or would like to add a comment on what they've seen will happen in the future of the internet? How many of you have shoulder injuries and you're incapable of raising your hand? Okay, if there are no questions, I'll simply thank you for your time. And, oh, there is a question. Okay, I won't thank you for your time yet. Just everyone's pointing in a direction there. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I have, watching the whole presentation, what's your prognostication about bandwidth requirements out for a rural area in 2025?
That's a great question. For those who didn't hear the question, first he said, Bob, what a swell guy you are. And then he went on to say, how will this affect the bandwidth requirements by 2025? I do have a few opinions on it. A lot of the things I've discussed today are not bandwidth intensive. Some of them, like holograms, will be very bandwidth intensive. So when I talked about nobody using a gigabit may not be enough for that. Also, you need to start preparing for 5G. 5G promises incredible speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second, although based on what I've read, I think that's if you're standing on the cell tower, no one else is using it, and you'll get a gig between you and the antenna. You'll also get irradiated to death, but at least you're going to get some good broadband speed. But as that is deployed, and just like with 4G, it's not coming to you first, but as 5G is deployed, and then perhaps 6G, that's going to be troublesome for your networks to handle. Certainly, today, if you're providing 50 or 60 megabits per second, I think your customers are pretty happy. My provider jumped me from 100 to 150 meg per second, and I didn't even know they did it. It didn't change my experience. But as you go from having 5 or 6 devices in your house to 50 or 60 devices in your house, depending on their bandwidth needs, and as we advance into some of these technologies we talked about, I think it's going to strain your networks. And we will, of course, rely on a consistent growth in transmission technology along with this escalating of IoT and its bandwidth requirements. Again, a sensor might use a few kilobits per second, but some of these other things might use 50, 60, 100 meg. And if you've got a lot of that going on in the household or in a business, it's going to place a hardship. One thing that I didn't mention, which I thought was cool in my research, and I'll mention since I still have 5 minutes, is something called free opticals. It's laser communication over the air, which is not new. It's already been used in satellites to communicate from satellite down to Earth. The military is now looking at it. In fact, they've partnered with Boeing. And while lasers are susceptible to rain and fog and other acts of nature, the theory is if it's really fast, if we're talking about a terabit of data, even if it hits rain, it's still going to be a gigabit of data by the time it gets to your target. Keeping in mind that laser is line of sight. So if one or both of those objects are moving that you're communicating with, you're going to have to follow that object. And in warfare, of course, conceivably you'd need a lot of these, so as people went behind one building, there would be another one to pick them up on the other side of that building. But if Boeing's working on it, it actually works, it could be competition for your networks, at least limited at first. I just thought I'd share that with you. I thought it was interesting. Maybe a disruption for you, maybe a help in your networks. You may be providing laser to the home. Other questions or comments? Yes, Mike? Okay, I think I can answer some of your question. The question is until cybersecurity issues are solved or mitigated to such an extent that you trust allowing a car to drive you and you trust a system to guide your car, or whatever other application that could cause you to die or cause harm to you, is that going to slow down the progress? And I alluded that in my introduction, in that we saw IBM predict a trillion devices, and we're more likely to be somewhere around 20 billion, and that's one of the biggest issues. Are you going to trust a surgery being performed on you if someone can hack into that system and take over and just carve your initials inside your kidneys? Okay, spur of the moment example, not a great one, but I think you get the point. And I think you're exactly right, Mike. I think that until we address cybersecurity issues, we're going to have that lag, and political issues and the financial issues. Financial issues tend to solve themselves as technology gets better and better. TVs, that are introduced at $5,000 eventually wind up being $500. Same thing with the sensors. But the security is going to be a big issue, and until we resolve that, I don't think people are going to put their lives in the hands of a computer more than they already do. And by the way, your cars already have computers, and if those computers are hacked into, and which they've done, I think they did it with a Jeep. It was a test to show what they could do. I think even 60 Minutes had an example. People are going to be very scary. I mean, how easily are you going to turn your car over to autonomous mode? I mean, these cars are only a few years away. How soon are you going to give up my hands on the wheel, my foot on the gas and brake, looking out for everything? Now, we've got sensors that help us with that, but how soon are you ready to give that up? And I think that's one of the challenges that the future is going to face, is how do we deal with the negative components which I touched upon on the end? Not just cybersecurity, but the social impact, the job impact, and of course, the worst envisioned impact on my second to last slide. Any other questions? Awesome, I did not finish early. Saved. With that, thank you so much for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob, very much for that very interesting and thoughtful presentation. As you can see, folks, the shy Bob Gnapp did not join us today. With that, we'll take a 15-minute break, and our sessions will start again at 10 a.m. Thank you for attending.